Hello, hello there, Dreadful Dolls. Welcome back. If you're new here, hi, hello, and welcome to Dreadfully Dainty Dips. I'm Lindsay, and it's so nice to have you a part of the Dreadful family. So, if you're wondering about the trailer that you just watched, yes, that's right. We're going to do a little change of scenery on the channel. Of course, I will still be doing all of the nail tutorials and, different manis and arts and, showing you different tips and tricks, but I want to jump into a little something that I'm kind of into, and I hope that you guys will come along for this little journey. So it's about to be spooky season, so I figured let's do some little Manicuriosities around the world. And so for today's video, what inspired or the theme for this video is that one of the companies that I'm kind of like friends with, Two Chicks One Dip, she came out with a Halloween collection called the Haunted Doll Collection, and this is about the Annabelle doll from The Conjuring, because The Conjuring is one of my favorite movies. So if we want to talk a little bit about haunted dolls, I mean, there's tons of haunted dolls, so actually did a video on Chucky. He was actually named after Robert the doll. And then, you have The Boy that they made a few movies about. And then, of course, Billy the Puppet from Saw. The Poltergeist clown. I'm sure my husband's laughing because I can never say poltergeist. Slappy from Goosebumps, if you want to go that kind of route. And then, of course, you have Talkie Tina from Twilight Zone. So there's many, many different haunted dolls. But for today's video, we're going to take a little bit of a dive into the Real Annabelle Doll and a little bit about her backstory. So if you notice, the names of these dips are, we have Annabelle, Locks and Curls, Silk Ribbons, Shattered Porcelain, and Glass Eyes. So that kind of describes Annabelle in a way. But with that being said, okay, so I just gotta let you know, today's tutorial isn't going to be like your usual nail tutorial. So we're going to tell a little haunting, a little ghost story, and see kind of what you all think about it. But I will leave everything that I've used in the description box down below. So if you just want to watch me do some nails and listen to a good little ghost story, then cool. And if you don't care for nails, but yet you want to throw me on in the background while you're doing your thing, we can do that too, like a little podcast kind of situation. But anyway, okay, so let's dive into the Real Annabelle. So actually, in doing some research for this video, I actually found out that the Annabelle doll, like we know her or we see her in The Conjuring and the Annabelle spinoff movies, she's actually, the original doll isn't like that doll. They made that doll for the movie because they kind of wanted to make their own version of it. But the actual Real Annabelle doll is just your plain old Raggedy Ann doll. Is that not wild? I had a Raggedy Ann doll, and the furthest thing from my mind was that it was haunted. I mean, how many of y'all had a Raggedy Ann doll back in the day? Just crazy. That totally blew my mind right out of the gate. But anyway, so since her first supposed haunting in 1970, this allegedly evil doll has been blamed for demonic possession, a slew of violent attacks, and at least 2 near-death experiences in recent years. So the true stories of Annabelle, of course, they have inspired many, many horror films. But, how much do we really know about Annabelle? Is she real? So, is she real? Is she a true vessel for a demonic spirit, in search of a human host? Or is she simply just a child's toy, used for a prop and wildly profitable ghost stories like in the movies? But, let's dive into it. So she actually still sits in a glass case bearing a hand-carved inscription of the Lord's Prayer over her case till this day, with a sign outside that reads, "Warning, positively do not open." So to the uninformed visitors of Warren's Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut, she looks like any other Raggedy Ann doll produced in the mid-20th century. But she is anything but ordinary. So let's back up a little bit. So who are the Warrens? Well, they were actually real people. They were Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they did have an occult museum because this is where they actually kept all of the things that they would collect from their paranormal investigations. They were paranormal investigators and self-taught demonologists. So they would go around and they would help people, who had hauntings, exorcisms. They helped in the Amityville horror. But yeah, so that's where the Warrens come in. There's lots of information that you can go out there and find about the Warrens, and they do many interviews. You can find a few of those, and I can leave some link down below if you'd like to go into what they were into, or, dive into that. But anyway, so the Real Annabelle doll was actually a doll, a Raggedy Ann doll, gifted in 1971 to a young nurse for her birthday from her mother. So this was a young nurse. So I want to, y'all keep in mind that she's not like a child. She's just a young nurse. She works at a hospital. She lives with a roommate, and they work night shift. So unbeknownst to her, this doll was used in many communications like seances before it was gifted to her. So she took this doll to bed with her over the next few nights, and after a couple shifts at the hospital with her roommate, they had the idea to start bringing the doll from the bedroom to the kitchen for breakfast. Over the next couple days, and her roommate kind of even joked and was like, "Oh, this Raggedy Ann doll here, she will start having breakfast with us." So they did just that, and on the third morning, they're talking to this doll over breakfast, right? And, let me remind you that this doll is like 2 to 3 foot tall and, very flimsy, it's a Raggedy Ann doll. So they're sitting there at the table, and, they're talking, and the doll's arms slowly move from the chair up onto the table. Like, what? Nope. Sell the house and get rid of the doll. We're moving. That kind of situation. But surprisingly, this did not alarm them at all. And so what do you think that they did? Well, they just so happened to know a medium friend. So they call up their medium friend, and, because they think that, there's a spirit in this doll, and they want to know more. And so their medium friend comes over to the nurse's house, and they do a seance. So now the nurses are kind of like, they're still really not taking the doll seriously, and little do they know that this night is about to be one of the most horrifying experiences of their lives. So they're sitting there in the middle of this seance, and the medium is telling them that there is a spirit of a 6-year-old girl in this doll who was actually killed in a vehicle accident just outside of where they live. Like, what are the odds, right? And there just so happened to be a 6-year-old little girl named Annabelle that did indeed pass away there. But Ed Warren goes on to say that God does not allow the spirits of children to enter into any dolls, that this was in fact a demon who was actually posing as that little girl to get sympathy from the two nurses. And it worked. So now this was no longer a doll to them. It was a child in their eyes. So they took this doll shopping, they bought it clothes, they took it for car rides and more. And the more that they gave this doll what it wanted, the more the hauntings grew. So they started to, they would grow and they would get stronger. So the more you feed these kind of spirits and these demons, the more they grow and they get stronger. So they would hear strange knocking sounds all over the house. They would see lights in different rooms at night, flicker, come on and go off. Sometimes they would even feel their bed shaking. So now that really did it, okay? So these nurses now, they're starting to get a little worried. I mean, wouldn't you after seeing all that and hearing all that? Like, no. Like, the things like that still give me the heebie-jeebies, Like, I don't, we don't mess with that kind of stuff. So they start leaving the doll back in the bedroom now. They're like, she ain't coming to breakfast with us no more. And so they continue to do a few night shifts at the hospital. And one night they come home around midnight, and guess who is waiting for them on the other side of that door? You guessed it. They open the door and the doll is standing there. Yes, standing. So now I have to remind you, we're talking about the flimsy stuffed Raggedy Ann doll, right? And does this scare them? Well, of course not. But it does freak out one of their fiancés who had actually been there with them that night. And this whole thing, since it took place, he was just not on board with it. And so he says, no, burn the doll. Do whatever you gotta do. Just get rid of it. It's obviously evil. So one day the fiancé is over like taking a nap, and he wakes up all kind of like, freaked out. And he tells the nurse, what a nightmare. I dreamt that the doll was strangling me. And so they're like, what? And so they go over and they check him out, and he actually has marks around his neck. So he gets up and he grabs the doll and he throws it across the room and he says, "You are nothing but a rag doll and you cannot hurt anyone." Then all of a sudden, 7 slashes appear on his body and blood pours through his shirt. A big chair slides across the room and pictures are shaking and falling off the walls and crashing onto the floor. They hear loud banging sounds like all through the house, and now they're getting scared. So they're all so they call someone, and and then it kind of like goes through the grapevine, and this person calls that person, and they finally get a hold of Ed and Lorraine Warren. So Ed and Lorraine and 2 others go to the nurse's house and perform an exorcism over the 2 nurses, the fiance, and the house. So Ed decides to take the doll back to their museum where him and Lorraine kept, the haunted possessed items bound and out of the hands of the public, right? I was telling you about their occult museum. So a young priest, so we're moving from the nurses. So a young priest visits the Warrens one day and wants to show them his new car. He's excited about it. He just got it. So while they're out joyriding, the priest asks, "Hey, Ed, I've been hearing a lot about this doll. Can I come see the doll?" So Ed's like, "Oh, sure, So he takes him into the museum when they get done. And the doll's sitting in a chair. So with that, she's not in the glass case just yet. So she's just sitting in this chair. And, kind of like just like the fiance, like all of a sudden the priest picks up the doll, like just out of nowhere, and he throws it across the room, saying, "God's more powerful than the devil." The priest leaves, and less than an hour later, his car goes like out of control and wrecks into a tractor trailer. Ed says he should have died, but he actually lived, and the last thing he remembered seeing was that doll. So a little while later, a detective pays the Warrens a visit because they were helping in a murder case of a little child. And when they were done discussing the case, the detective asked to look around the museum. Well, he looks around and tells Ed, all of these things in this museum, they're kind of, scary, but I just cannot take my eyes off that doll. And he's, talking about Annabelle. So just then, Ed's phone rings, and so he tells the detective, "I'll be right back. Do not touch anything. Like, don't touch it." So while Ed was on the phone, the detective comes up the stairs looking like white as a ghost as he leaves. And Ed said when he returned to the museum to kind of see what was going on, that he guessed the detective had picked up the doll because items were knocked all over the place and, some things were all over the floor and in disarray. Then one of the group, and then one day, a group of college students went to visit the museum. And, they didn't believe it, and they just thought it was just a bunch of hocus pocus. And so, they, they go in there and they're looking around, and this one guy, he's like, "Oh, this is just a bunch of bunk, I don't believe it." And, was knocking on the doll's case and saying, like, "I dare you right now to put slashes all over me." And so, of course, Ed wasn't having it. That's one of the rules of thumb. You don't provoke any of these spirits. And so Ed wasn't having it, and he made them leave. And so less than 3 hours later, what do you think happened to this guy now? Well, he was on a motorcycle with his girlfriend, and they had a motorcycle wreck. And he unfortunately died, but the girl survived. But she was in the hospital for over a year. And so when they went to ask her some questions about what had happened, she had said that they were laughing about the doll. And then all of a sudden they wrecked into this tree. And, right before that, the boyfriend had just was talking about the Annabelle doll. So that is the story of Annabelle. After that, Ed and Lorraine decided to put it in a case because it's like the Annabelle doll could not be left outside of the case. People wanted to touch it, and, if you provoked it and you touched it, these things would happen. So since then, Annabelle is still in its case, all sealed up, and, she has like all these prayers and signs and things carved, in the wood and things around her, and you can look it up and still see the doll. But what do we think? Do you think it's just a bunch of bunk? Would you think that from these stories that they're just kind of like, just coincidences that happened just so after these people visited this Annabelle doll? I mean, we'll never know because, Ed actually goes on in an interview to say that, they tried to get the nurses to come forward and to, the like other witnesses that they've had, and like they are scared to death, like these people will not come forward. So we really don't have any more like evidence besides, what, who lived it, in that moment of time. But it's just kind of crazy. So that is the story of the actual Annabelle doll from The Conjuring. But yeah, those movies, man, I haven't seen a good movie since back in the day. I just feel like they don't make them like they used to, And then of course, the first Paranormal Activity came out, and yeah, it was kind of like a little corny, I'll admit, but it did have a bunch of like jump scares, and it just gave me the willies, like anything like that. You're always like the hair stands up on the back of your neck. Do you see a shadow out of the corner of your eye? You can't watch them in the dark because you just don't know who's standing behind you. All of those silly little things. But yeah, anyway, okay, so what did you guys think of our Annabelle story? Could this possibly be a thing of the Manicuriosities Around the World? You see what we did there? I actually want to thank one of my nail friends. She helped me come up with the name of this series, and so I cannot take credit for that, but she's awesome. So Manicuriosities Around the World, I hope you guys will join me on this little journey. Of course, since spooky season is coming up, I really hope that we can continue on even after spooky season. Just to give a little change of scenery to the channel. Other than doing nail tutorials and stuff all the time and reviews and unboxings and things, we will still do all that. But I just kind of want to take a dive into just some oddball crazy things that, goes on out there in the world, But anyway, all right, guys. Well, let me know what you think. What did you think of today's Manny? Here it is, all finished up. We have Annabelle. And we use 2 Chicks 1 Dip Annabelle, which is a thermal. Very pretty. And water slides from Nails Truly. All right, guys. So until next time, I will see y'all later. Bye.